Hello, I'm Jeff Morgan. You are listening to The Unchosen Road, the first book in the Earthlings of Veilwyn series. This is an authorized recording. If you are interested in following this story, please like and subscribe. To see a full list of my books, visit Amazon Kindle. Thank you and enjoy.
Chapter 4. The Mysterious Mentor. Ethan fell to his knees. The impact ran through bone and into the soil. His palms struck the ground, cold and damp, and his body folded until his cheek brushed the dirt. Each breath scraped his throat raw. He had no strength left to rise, no shield, nothing but the tremor of bare skin pressed to unyielding earth. The cold crept over him with the patience of water finding cracks. Stripped of everything, he felt carved down to flesh and fatigue. The circle held him. Ancient stones rose in a ring, rough slabs taller than any man, their edges worn smooth but still whole. Each carried faint lines etched deep, grooves so old they seemed part of the rock itself. As he sagged, gasping, the lines flickered. For an instant they gleamed like light on moving water. Then they dulled again, leaving only scars of age. The mist that had chased him halted at the edge. It pressed against the stones and recoiled, curling inward, folding back on itself. It moved like breath caught in glass. Ethan stared, half aware, dimly realizing he had crossed into something older than the forest. The silence that followed pressed heavy upon him. It was not quiet, but density, a stillness thick enough to bruise. He shifted, the soil grinding against his knees, grit biting at the cuts on his skin. His chest heaved. Each inhale broke into coughing. The air inside the circle was colder than the mists, but cleaner. The rot was gone. He breathed again, shallower, until the weight of his own body forced him back to the ground. It felt like a judgment. The stones loomed around him, their faces fixed and patient. He could not shake the sense that others had knelt here before, stripped and spent, trembling against the earth. The ground beneath his palms pulsed faintly, a beat so slow he almost mistook it for his own heart. Humiliation burned sharper than the cold. To be bare in the dirt, reduced to breath and skin, scraped at what little pride remained. Yet beneath that sting was another current, quieter but deeper. This breaking was not chance. The circle demanded emptiness before it would speak. He pushed against the ground. His elbows locked and shook. One leg bent forward. He rose half upright, vision swimming, and collapsed again. The air around him hummed with waiting. The mist hissed against the boundary. The sound was not air but pressure, a vibration that resonated through bone. It strained to breach but could not pass. Ethan closed his eyes against it, against the thought of those unseen shapes lingering just beyond reach. Then the pressure shifted. Something moved through the mist. At first there was only a shape forming from vapor, a deeper shadow among shadows. Then it took on form. A man. He walked slowly, the fog bending aside as he came. His cloak hung heavy and dark, folds brushing the ground but never catching on stone. Each step was quiet, measured, inevitable. He stopped at the edge of the circle. The mist drew back from him, spiraling in uneasy retreat. His face lay hidden beneath a hood, but the breadth of his shoulders and the calm of his stance carried authority. A sword rested at his side, plain in shape, marked with faint lines cut into the metal like old script. The air moved. Ethan felt it ripple against his skin, subtle as a change in tide. The man did not enter, only stood as though considering the circle itself. Ethan tried to speak, but his throat refused sound. The silence deepened. Then came the voice. Low, even. The words entered the space with the weight of stone. You have crossed the veil. The sentence did not explain. It declared. It belonged to a ritual spoken long before the speaker was born. The phrase fell into Ethan's mind like a stone dropped into deep water. He did not understand it, but he felt its gravity. He lifted his head. The man's had shifted slightly, and a line of silver hair caught the dim light. For a moment the circle itself seemed to brighten, as if listening. Ethan pressed his palms into the soil and forced himself upright. Muscle screamed. He rose halfway before collapsing to one knee. His breath tore in his chest, but a thin spark of defiance held. The man did not move. He did not offer help. He stood as if the stones had fixed him there, watching without judgment. Most do not survive their first night, he said. Silence settled again. The mist writhed at the perimeter. The stones stood unmoved. The man waited. Ethan knelt, shaking, raw against the cold air, yet something in him remained unbroken. He understood, dimly, that whatever had begun here could not be undone. The circle had accepted him. The words had sealed it. There would be no return. At last the man stepped forward. The mist drew back from him, curling and folding like a tide retreating from shore. He walked through it without resistance, the sound of his boots swallowed by the still air. His presence filled the space. Ethan's stomach tightened. "There is no going back," the man said. His tone was calm but final, a verdict already passed. Ethan shook his head, voice breaking. "Home. I have to. That life is gone." It was spoken without cruelty and without mercy. The words struck harder than the cold, leaving nothing to argue against. Ethan's legs gave way. He fell forward, catching himself on both hands, breath tearing in his throat. Dirt clung to his skin. The man did not move to help. He waited. "Stand." The command landed like weight. Ethan flinched, palms sinking into soil, arms trembling under his weight. "Stand," the man said again, slower, as if the word itself carried force. Humiliation burned through the fatigue. Ethan clenched his jaw and pushed. His shoulders screamed. His body shook, but he rose halfway before collapsing again. The man did not turn away. His gaze held steady, unrelenting, as though this effort were the only truth worth witnessing. Ethan spat mud from his mouth and tried again. His muscles flared with pain. He rose inch by inch, swaying, until he stood upright, knees trembling, breath ragged in his chest. Only then did the man incline his head, a gesture so faint it might have gone unnoticed. Recognition, not approval. "The veil called you," he said. "That is why you are here. Not by chance, not by choice. It does not take without reason." Ethan's lips parted, but no words came. The phrase carried the weight of ritual. His mind refused it even as his body accepted it. He wanted to demand an answer, some logic to justify the loss. But the man's tone warned that questions would dissolve before they reached him. Beyond the stones, the mist churned and pressed against the unseen wall, its hunger muted but constant. Ethan could feel it at his back like heat without flame. He drew his arms tighter, shivering from cold and shame. The man's silence held more authority than his speech. He stood as if the measure of this trial had already been taken and Ethan's survival was simply confirmation. Ethan swallowed, his throat raw. He hated the tremor in his knees, the way weakness clung to him, and most of all the knowledge that without the circle, without this stranger, he would already be lost. "What do you want from me?" His voice cracked into the stillness. The man did not answer at once. He turned, tracing the line of the monoliths with his eyes, the faint carvings catching what little light remained. His hand rested briefly on the sword at his side, then dropped again. When he spoke, his tone carried the same finality as before. "Not what I want. What you will endure." The words entered the air like a mark carved into stone. Ethan's jaw set. His legs trembled, but he locked them straight, refusing to yield. His body shook from cold and exhaustion, yet a thin thread of defiance tightened in his spine. The man did not press further. He stood still, the mist shifting around them, the stones watching in silence. The quiet grew heavy again, but it had changed. Ethan stood within it now, however unsteadily. That was the difference. He did not know what path lay ahead or how far it would lead. But as the cold air filled his lungs and the circle held its watch, one truth settled in him completely. There would be no return. The cold chewed at Ethan's skin, intent on hollowing him from the inside out. His body shook with the effort of standing, his chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. He crossed his arms over himself, not from shame, but to keep his ribs from splitting under the force of shivers. The man before him moved at last. With a motion as deliberate as breath, he unclasped the pin at his shoulder. The cloak slid loose, heavy with moisture and long wear. For a moment he held it in one hand, as though measuring something beyond weight, then stepped close enough that Ethan felt the heat of his presence. The cloak fell over him. It struck his shoulders with both burden and relief. The fabric was coarse, dense, smelling faintly of smoke and travel. It hung heavy, pulling at his arms, its hem dragging through soil. Yet warmth bloomed beneath it, slow and immediate. Ethan drew the folds around his body, holding them tight. The air dulled. The tremors slowed. His breath deepened. The shame of nakedness thinned, not erased but veiled. The cold still stung his skin, but he could breathe without pain. The man's voice followed, calm and certain. "Now you will walk." The words were not comfort. They were command. The cloak was not kindness. It was mantle. Ethan swallowed. His throat scraped raw. "Why help me?" "Because you lived." No more explanation. No softening. The answer landed like stone. Ethan pulled the cloak tighter, the smell of earth and iron rising from its folds. The man turned toward the circle's edge. His boots pressed into the soil with a rhythm that matched his composure. Beyond the stones, the mist churned and hissed, but it parted at his approach. Ethan's legs trembled. His body begged to collapse, to sink into the dirt, to stay wrapped in warmth and silence. He looked behind him. The circle stood in patient watch, its monoliths black against the faint light. Beyond them the mist pulsed, waiting for weakness. He could remain there for a while, safe inside borrowed grace. But he would not last. The man did not look back. He crossed the threshold and vanished into fog. Ethan's pulse quickened. The choice was clear and merciless. Stay and fade, or follow. His feet shifted, the soil biting into bare flesh. The cloak dragged heavy, its weight pulling at his spine, but he steadied himself. He clenched his jaw and took one step, then another. The word still burned inside him. Walk. At the boundary, the mist recoiled from the cloak, folding in on itself. Ethan paused. The air here felt divided, thick with unseen pressure. Behind him was stillness, before him, the unknown. His breath trembled. Then he stepped through. The air closed around him like water. The mist rolled but did not touch. The cloak absorbed its hunger, threads humming faintly as though something within them still lived. Ethan tightened it around his shoulders. He could feel the faint pulse of hidden marks stitched into the weave, patterns buried beneath the cloth. Behind him, the circle was gone. Only fog and distance remained. The man walked ahead, steady and unhurried, his stride cutting through the mist like a line drawn across water. Ethan followed, his own steps uneven. Stones and roots bit into his feet, but he did not stop. The cloak was heavy, yet it steadied him. It carried more than warmth. It carried weight, a mark of having been seen and not rejected, burden and proof in equal measure. For the first time since he had fallen, he felt something stronger than fear. He felt tethered. They moved through the dark. The mist whispered against the edges of the path, restless but held back. Trees loomed like columns of shadow. Drops fell from their branches, soft and precise. The air was thick, yet it no longer bit through him. The man said nothing. His silence was complete, the kind that filled space rather than emptied it. Ethan's breath came rough and shallow, his muscles burning, but each step carried its own meaning. The circle was behind him. The stones had done their work. Ahead waited only the road, the mist and this stranger who walked as if the night itself had learned to obey him. Ethan drew the cloak closer, the fabric brushing his jaw, the smell of old smoke steadying his breath. He walked, not because he was ready, but because the command still lived in him. He had chosen, and the world had already closed behind. The road ahead was no road at all, only a pressed strip of soil worn by countless passages. Mist drifted along its edges, coiling through the trees like smoke searching for a vent. Ethan walked bent beneath the weight of the cloak, his bare feet raw against stone and root, each step a sting. His breath rasped, his legs trembled, yet he kept on, because to stop was to be left behind, and to be left behind was to die. The man moved without pause, his stride steady, neither fast nor slow. His silence was heavier than the mist. Ethan carried his questions like stones in his chest, turning them over until they bruised him from within. At last, he forced one free. "What is this place?" His voice cracked halfway through. The man did not turn. "The veil." The word landed hollow. Ethan ground his teeth. "That means nothing. Why am I here? Why was I dragged into this?" The man slowed just enough that Ethan almost collided with him. He turned his head, and beneath the hood, the faint glint of eyes caught the dim light. When he spoke, the sound carried the certainty of ritual. "The veil is a threshold older than the gods you name. It lies between what was and what may come. It does not open for chance. It does not take without cause." Ethan felt the truth in the words, though they gave him nothing to hold. "You think that helps?" His voice rose, rough, half plea, half anger. "I had a life. I had a home. I did not ask for this." "No one asks." The answer felt like a gate closing. Ethan swallowed hard, the heat of fury burning under the weight of cold. "Then tell me why. Tell me what reason this veil has for tearing me from everything I knew." The man turned away. "The reason is not mine to tell." Ethan cursed under his breath and followed, dragging one foot after the other. The silence folded in again, dense, absolute. He wanted to break it, to demand more, but the sound of the man's steady pace ahead reminded him that words were useless here. They walked on. The forest pressed close, trunks like columns, branches woven thick above them. The mist crept between the roots, patient, waiting. The rhythm of their footsteps was the only human sound left in the world. When the man spoke again, it was unprompted. "The veil does not take without reason. Hold to that, even when nothing else holds. You will find the cause, or it will find you." The words sank deep, a refrain that carried no comfort, only inevitability. "Why me?" The question slipped out. "Raw?" The man did not answer. His silence returned, immovable as stone. They passed through a clearing where the trees bowed back and the mist lay thick across the ground. Ethan stumbled, knees striking soil. The cloak dragged at him, heavy with damp, pulling him down. For a heartbeat he stayed there, breath shallow, vision narrowing. The man stopped a few paces ahead. He did not reach for Ethan. He did not command. He simply waited, still as the stones had been. Ethan pressed his fists into the earth. The grit bit his palms, the cold burned his legs. He forced air into his lungs, pushed until his knees locked, and rose again. His body shook, but he stood. The man turned and resumed his walk. Ethan followed. The silence that returned was different now. It carried a kind of weight that was not cruelty, but purpose. The man's restraint was deliberate, as though he knew that each step Ethan managed on his own mattered more than any answer could. The night deepened. The mist began to thin. Above the branches, stars appeared. Unfamiliar, sharp, scattered like shards of glass. "Ethan." The man's voice came once more. "Do not cling to what you left. The veil has already unmade it. If you would live, you must walk forward." There was no malice, no pity, only truth. Ethan dropped his gaze. His throat burned. His eyes stung. He said nothing. He pulled the cloak tighter and walked. The stars shifted above him. The mist whispered behind. The rhythm of their footsteps carried on into the dark. The trees thinned at last, giving way to an open stretch where the mist lay shallow. The man's stride did not falter, and Ethan followed, each step sending needles of pain through the raw skin of his feet. His breath rasped, catching in the cold air. Then, ahead, shapes took form through the haze. Two horses, steady despite the fog, and a wagon resting in the shadow of an old oak. Ethan slowed. The sight struck him with an ache that felt almost like relief. After so much formless dark, the wagon's hard lines and the beast's quiet presence were proof that something human still existed here. The wagon was plain, its boards patched and scarred, but it smelled of leather and old hay, of dust and long roads. The horses shifted their weight and exhaled softly, steam curling from their nostrils. Their eyes followed Alden's approach, alert but unafraid. The man went to the wagon, lifted a bundled shape from within, and set it on the ground. With slow precision, he untied the rope that bound it. Inside lay folded clothes, rough spun, worn but whole, edges frayed by travel. He lifted them once, then let them fall into Ethan's arms. Dress. The word was neither mercy nor offer. It was command, quiet as the draw of a blade. Ethan clutched the bundle to his chest. The fabric was coarse but real, solid against his skin. Turning slightly from Alden, he loosened the cloak just enough to drag the garments on. The shirt scratched but held warmth. The trousers hung loose, the rope belt rough against his waist, but they covered him. When he finished, he wrapped the cloak around himself again. The shame that had burned through him since the circle eased to a dull ember. Alden watched without a word. When Ethan was done, he reached once more into the wagon. This time he drew out a short blade, sheathed in dark leather. The metal caught what faint light the stars gave, etchings glimmering along the hilt like fading embers. He extended it toward Ethan. No one lives unarmed here. Ethan hesitated, then reached out. The dagger was heavier than it looked, the weight honest and steady. The carvings along the hilt were shallow but precise, and when his fingers closed around them, the metal seemed to hum faintly, or perhaps it was his own pulse answering it. He swallowed and slipped the blade into its sheath, fastening it awkwardly at his side. The leather hung loose, unfamiliar, but the presence of steel steadied him. Alden inclined his head slightly. Keep it near. Sleep with it. Walk with it. Lose it, and you will not live long enough to regret it. Ethan nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. The man stepped closer, his shadow falling across the wagon. His eyes caught what little light remained, clear and sharp. Your name? The question startled him. He had not said it aloud since the world had split apart. For a moment he feared he'd lost it, forgotten his own anchor. But then it came, fragile but intact. Ethan, he said. His voice cracked, then steadied. Ethan Graves. Alden regarded him for a heartbeat longer, as if weighing the shape of the name. Then he gave his own. Alden. The syllables settled between them, plain, unornamented, final. A name built to endure. Ethan repeated it softly, almost to himself. Alden. The man turned back to the wagon, securing what remained of the bundles, his motions efficient and deliberate. Ethan stood near the horses, cloak drawn close, dagger heavy at his side. His body still trembled, but his mind began to quiet. He was clothed, armed, named. The mist lingered beyond the clearing, restless, pressing near but unwilling to cross. The wagon, the horses, the steel, all of it felt like a fragile tether against the vastness of what waited outside. Ethan ran his thumb once along the dagger's hilt. The grooves pressed faint warmth into his skin. He didn't know what they meant, but the idea that they meant something steadied him. He was no longer empty-handed. Alden climbed onto the wagon's bench and glanced toward him. Come. Ethan obeyed, pulling himself up beside him. The wood creaked under their weight. The horses shifted, muscles rippling under dark hides, and the reins tightened in Alden's hands. With a single, low command, the wagon lurched forward. The wheels found rhythm against the earth. Mist parted before them in slow coils, and the stars thinned above the treetops. Ethan drew the cloak closer, felt the pulse of steel at his side, and for the first time since he had fallen in the circle, he let himself breathe as though tomorrow might exist. The wagon rattled over the uneven track until faint lights shimmered through the mist ahead. At first, Ethan thought it was a trick of exhaustion, some distortion of fog and starlight. But as they drew nearer, the glow resolved into lanterns swinging from crooked posts, their light pooling across worn stone. Roof lines appeared, low and thatched, huddled close together as if for warmth. A village. The sight struck him with sudden force. His body ached for shelter, for firelight, for something fixed and human after so much shapeless dark. The horses plodded forward with calm assurance, as though they had walked this path 100 times before. The wheels ground against cobbles, and the mist seemed to thin, held back by some unseen boundary. Faces appeared in the half-light. Villagers peered from doorways and narrow windows, eyes quick and wary. Some clutched wooden charms at their throats. Others traced shapes into the air, the same shape repeated again and again. Ethan noticed marks carved above each lintel, spirals and symbols that caught and held the lantern glow. A hush followed the wagon as it passed, whispers darting through the shadows like mice. Alden's gaze did not waver. He guided the horses through the narrow street toward a squat building at the center, its sign carved with the shape of a mug. An inn. He drew the reins, and the wagon came to rest. Ethan sat rigid beside him, the dagger cold at his side, the cloak pulled tight against his shoulders. He could feel every pair of eyes fixed upon them. Alden climbed down first. When he stepped through the inn's door, the murmur of the room folded into silence, as though his presence had pressed the air flat. No one greeted him. No one dared. He crossed to the counter and laid down a small stack of coins. The innkeeper, a broad woman with a lined face and cautious eyes, counted them quickly and nodded. She motioned toward a corner table. "Food. Drink." Then upstairs, Alden said. His voice was even, unbending. Ethan followed him, legs shaking from fatigue. He sank onto the bench opposite, the wood cool beneath his palms. The room smelled of broth and smoke, a scent so achingly familiar that it hollowed his chest. Bowls arrived soon after, set down by a girl who would not meet his gaze. The stew steamed thick with root vegetables and thin strips of meat. Beside it lay a slab of dark bread, crust rough with salt. Ethan did not wait. He tore into it, hunger shoving caution aside, and burned his tongue in the first mouthful. The bread was coarse but real, the salt sharp enough to sting. He ate until his hands trembled. Alden watched him quietly, arms folded. Only when Ethan slowed did he draw the bowl toward himself and eat, each motion measured. Around them, the villagers whispered in low tones. Ethan caught fragments, a few words he did not know, syllables stretched with both awe and fear. Eyes flicked toward Alden, then away as if afraid to be caught staring. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low. "Why are they looking at you like that?" Alden's gaze lifted from the bowl. "Because they know what I am." Ethan waited for more, but the silence that followed was complete. He did not press. The innkeeper returned once more, setting down a small plate of dried fruit. Her hands shook faintly as she stepped back. Ethan studied the offering, uncertain whether it was custom or warning. He looked to Alden, who gave no sign, and took a piece. The sweetness was sharp, almost painful after the salt and smoke, but it steadied him. When the dishes were cleared, Alden leaned back, his voice a low rumble beneath the hum of the hearth. "Do not mistake this place for safety. These walls will hold for a night, perhaps two, but the veil presses everywhere. Remember that." Ethan swallowed, his throat dry. The warmth of the room clashed with the memory of mist. He wanted to argue, to believe the shelter could last, but the whispers of the villagers silenced that thought. Their glances still darted toward Alden, not hostile, but wary, reverent, afraid. Whatever power walked with him had entered with them, and no charm carved into the doorposts could keep it out. Alden rose. The bench scraped softly against the floor. He motioned toward the stairs. "Rest." Ethan obeyed, the weight of exhaustion dragging at every limb. The innkeeper watched from below as he followed Alden up the narrow steps, her expression unreadable. At the landing, Alden opened a door to a small room with two narrow beds and a shuttered window. Even here, faint spirals were carved into the walls, marks worn smooth by time and worry. Ethan sat on the nearest bed. The mattress was rough but mercifully solid. His stomach was full, his body warm, and the dagger lay close within reach. Yet the murmur of the villagers and the echo of Alden's warning lingered in his mind. This was not safety, only pause. The room held its quiet the way a cupped hand holds water. Wood settled in soft creaks. From the street below came the uneven clop of a hoof, then stillness again, as if the village refused to disturb whatever had entered with them. Ethan lay on the rough mattress and let the weight of his exhaustion pull him down. The dagger rested within reach on the stool between the narrow beds. Alden sat with his back to the door, eyes closed, hands resting loose on his knees, as though listening to something that lived in the walls. No words passed between them. The day had stripped Ethan of questions. Fatigue did the rest. Sleep took him like a tide. He dreamed of a shoreline that was not sea. Silver water breathed in slow rhythm, each wave carrying fragments of names. Some he knew, others slipped away before he could catch them, dissolving into light that stung his eyes. A pale boat drifted across that margin and a figure rowed without effort, each stroke erasing memory from the wake. Where the oar touched, the world forgot. The scene shifted. Hills unrolled like parchment and folded again, rising as towers that remembered they had once been trees. Antlers lifted above a black ridge, vast and branching, each tine strung with pale fire like stars caught on bone. A stag walked the slope with slow, mournful grace. When it turned its head, wind passed through the antlers and made a sound like winter over empty fields. The animal bowed once, not to him, but to something behind him, and was gone. A corridor formed from leaning stones, each slab etched with faint lines that pulsed like embers under ash. He stepped between them and found himself in a hall without a roof. A chair waited on a raised platform, carved from shadow and old oaths. No one sat upon it, yet he felt the pressure of unseen eyes, an audience both expectant and weary. He wanted to approach, but could not. His feet refused. A whisper slid beneath his ribs, a voice that tasted like iron and rain. Choose. Another shift. A lake stretched before him, still as glass, reflecting not sky but another world beneath. He leaned over and did not find his own reflection. The surface showed a man he did not recognize, eyes harder, jaw set. Behind that man stood a shape without features, holding a lantern between two hands. The light inside did not burn. It remembered. When he reached toward it, the water trembled and 1,000 ripples carried fragments of him outward into the dark. He woke with a sharp breath, as though breaking the surface. The room was washed in the gray that comes before sunrise, the color that erases edges. The air smelled of damp wool and old wood. For a moment he did not know where he was. The dream clung, heavy as a net. Then the stool came into focus and the dagger upon it, and the second bed across the room. Empty. The blanket there had been folded with deliberate care. On it lay 3 coins, dull with long use, and a scrap of parchment weighted beneath them. Ethan swung his legs from the cot, every muscle stiff with ache, and reached for the note. No message, only a small map drawn in quick strokes. A road, a bend in a river, a mark where the inn must be. Farther on, another mark, a settlement circled once and crossed with a single diagonal line. Between them, the space was blank, as if the cartographer had doubted the land's willingness to hold shape. Ethan stared until the lines blurred. He set the parchment down again. The truth of abandonment landed late, quiet but solid. The man had brought him across a threshold, then withdrawn like a hand from water. It should have felt like betrayal. Instead, it felt finished. Alden had not fled. He had concluded. The coins would buy a night, perhaps 2. He turned one over in his fingers. The metal bore a worn sigil, half erased by time, its meaning long since rubbed away. He gathered the coins and slipped them into his pocket. The faint chime they made against one another sounded too loud in the stillness. He waited, listening, but the room did not protest. He dressed slowly, moving like someone reacquainting himself with the language of his own body. Shirt, trousers, belt, then the sheath that hung at his hip. The fabric smelled faintly of smoke. When he lifted the dagger, warmth met his palm. He slid it into place and felt steadier for the familiar weight. Downstairs, the inn had begun its morning ritual. A single lantern burned by the counter, its light small but steady. The innkeeper nodded once in recognition, but did not invite words. A boy with a mop paused to watch Ethan cross the floor, then went back to work, careful to avoid the threshold stones set flush into the boards. Symbols had been scratched into them, spirals and forked lines. He had not noticed them the night before. The sight raised a prickle along his arms. These markings were not superstition. They were negotiation. He left 2 coins on the counter for the room and whatever meal had kept him alive. The innkeeper slid them away and placed a wrapped heel of bread where his hand had been. She did not meet his eyes. He thanked her anyway. The word felt foreign. Outside, the street ran narrow between roofs of thatch. A dog watched from a doorway, head tilted, then retreated when he looked back. Smoke rose from a few chimneys and flattened against the low morning. A cart creaked past, its driver giving him one quick glance before looking away. Ethan stepped into the square and breathed the chill. The village neither welcomed nor forbade him. It simply allowed his passage. He stood there with the map in his hand, the last coin in his pocket, and felt the small gravity of choice. Stay and wait for a man who would not return. Or move, because movement was the only thing that had carried him this far. He turned toward the lane that led out of town. Beyond the crooked houses and hedgerows, a faint light trembled at the horizon. It was not sunlight. It held too steady, a line of pale metal hammered across the edge of the world. Settlement, perhaps, or something wearing its shape. He slipped the map back into his pocket, adjusted the belt at his hip, drew one long breath, and let the weight of the empty bed pass through him. Loss moved. So would he. Ethan walked. The lane gave way to rutted earth, then to a broader road fringed with pale grasses. Birds lifted from the hedges as he passed and settled again behind him. He walked until his blood warmed and the ache in his feet became a kind of truth. The road met him honestly, neither cruel nor kind. He did not look back. The village fell away behind him, and the shimmer ahead gathered shape. Rooftops, perhaps, watchfires, or another test. It did not matter. His body found rhythm. His breath kept pace. The world opened by small degrees. Whatever had been taken, this step was his. He took another, and another. And the light ahead did not fade.
The next chapter of this novel will be posted on my YouTube channel. My other books are available on Amazon Kindle. Thank you.